He's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 28 years of experience.
And he's Howard Ibach, a former creative director and copywriter, and the author of two books on the creative brief. And together, we're the Brief Brothers. We love talking about advertising, creative briefs, and creative briefing. And we're back today, Howard, with another episode. And I thought today we would do something a little bit different. I received an email from Mark Pollard. I'm on his mailing list, and Mark is a very experienced strategist known in the strategy community, particularly on LinkedIn, where we spend a lot of our time lurking and looking for material.
Maybe we can
And
get him on. Maybe we can get him on.
yeah, and he does strategy training. He's a strategy mentor, and I'm on his mailing list. And he mails out periodic emails with different topics. And so here's the email, and it has top strategist traits. And um, the reason I was interested in this topic was because our very first episode was what makes a good brief writer. And even though brief writing is one of the roles that a strategist has, it's one of the important ones. And there was, I think, some overlap in what we talked about way back in episode one with the things that we see on this list. But I thought it would be just good to talk about it and see whether we agree, disagree. And it's really interesting because he talks about, like, he gives the headline of like what the trade is, and then he talks about like what the feature is, and then what the bug or the flaw might be if you're too, I guess, experience this trait too deeply, or have this trait too deeply.
So you
So
you could say that he's thinking like a strategist as he outlines what it requires to be a strategist.
yes. And so I thought we'd go over these 10 items. We'll just say them real quick, and then we'll grab a couple that we can go more in depth in. But as
Okay.
you see here, the first one is you enjoy watching and listening. You notice patterns. You ask difficult questions. You're okay with ambiguity. You're good with words. You're competitive and like to win. You're a little intellectual but pragmatic. You enjoy creativity. Business intrigues you, and you're a student of the world.
And this will be an interesting conversation as well, Henry, because you're going to be, I think we've agreed you're going to take two of these and I'm going to take two and we'll talk about them. And it'll be interesting to hear your perspective as a strategist and my perspective as a creative, talking
And
about what goes, what are the, which of these qualities or traits really make a good strategist. So this will be an interesting conversation. Let's see if we agree and where we agree and where we disagree.
yeah, and so the first one that I chose is this one, number 6. You're competitive and like to win. He says the feature is you'll need this edge if you're to last any reasonable amount of time in a strategy career. Wanting to win makes you work hard.
Mm.
The flaw is maybe you spend a few years compromising your values to feel that winning feeling. Maybe you steal someone's work. You tell me, you tell me this happens. So that's what he's saying he's heard. Um, so my mind immediately goes to pitches
Mm.
when I hear the word winning, but winning could be in different contexts. Like a win is you sold an idea to an existing client. Um, so that's a win. But in my mind, I go immediately to like a pitch situation, an RFP situation. And this really resonates with me because I am competitive and I like to win. And probably, I remember the first big win I had in my career as a strategist. We were pitching for Royal Caribbean Cruise Line, and we won. And that is like, I liken it to playing golf. Like, I suck at golf, but you'll get that bucket of balls at the driving range, and you hit 80 of them, and they're errant, horrible. And then you hit that one shot, and it gives you that adrenaline that, you hit it far, you hit it straight. It's a beautiful shot. And winning in a competitive situation is gives you that adrenaline boost. It kind of gives you energy to continue on, I still got it, so pitching and winning is definitely a drug.
One of the old sayings about um, golf is not about how many great shots you hit, it's about how few bad shots you hit.
Yeah, I think here you generally, because you either win or you don't win,
Yeah.
you could say they're the bad shots and the great shots. I haven't found in my experience, that I've had to compromise my values to win. In fact, I think that when I've won, it's been precisely because I have a strong set of values, and I have a different perspective maybe than what others in my position would have. So I've found that I haven't had that flaw, but I could see where maybe some people would have that.
Well, I don't disagree with you on this one. I have to be honest and say that in the course of my career as a copywriter and as a creative director, I've known only a handful of strategists, the ones who were, working at the agencies where I did. And I know that creatives are very competitive. So I might have been more caught up in the competitive world of creativity in the creative department, so much so that I wasn't really paying attention to whether or not the strategists with whom I worked were in that same league. So, I've known you for a long, long time, and I know you have very strong opinions about things. And I guess that translates into a kind of competitiveness. So I do see this. I do see the importance and the value of this, but also, the potential for it to, I don't want to say
Be a
hurt,
negative.
hurt. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, be a negative. I want to say it would hurt you, but it
Good.
could it could potentially be a negative. Yeah. So so you want to do should we want to do alternate do this
Yeah,
between the two of
let's
us?
do that.
Okay, if you want to, I think if you scroll, is it number 8 or 9 about creativity? Yeah, you enjoy creativity. Okay, as a creative, this kind of seems obvious. But again, one of the things that you've pointed out to me over the years of doing this podcast with you, Henry, is I've wondered from time to time whether I thought of myself as a strategic creative, and you've not hesitated to say, look, when you start asking questions like why, and it's not just why, but that's where you start, that indicates a degree of strategic thinking on your part. So that part, that part of it has emerged as something that I've not really thought about much before, but now I do. So to be a good strategist, you also have to be creative. It requires you to at least start anticipating what possible ideas are going to emerge from your brief, for example. And you've said many times before, Henry, that uh, you always kind of just have a sense in your head where your brief might take you, and then you're often surprised when the work comes back and you just didn't see what your creative department delivered. Or as well, sometimes you end up writing a different brief because the ideas that come back from your creative department are superior to what your own creative brief uh, suggested, or the direction that it was pointing in, which you address by saying you have to be humble. So the feature here is, yeah, you got to love making ideas happen. You have your own ideas. You can't do the research. You can't run workshops. I'm thinking about the number of ideas on Mark's list, which was an earlier part of the email of what it is that you do as a strategist. Besides writing a creative brief, we focus on the brief because that's really what brought us together. So you have to have ideas, and you're going to come up with those ideas as you're writing your brief. You're going to start ideating if you're a good strategist, I think. The flaw here is um, Julia Cameron. I guess she wrote The Artist's Way. There's another book, Austin McLeon, who wrote Steal Like an Artist, maybe on the similar vein, but refers to a shadow artist and resenting this. A shadow artist is someone who lives in the shadow of other people's artistry rather than being, yeah, you have to learn to live vicariously. You have to enjoy and revel in the ideas that your creatives come up with, but not take ownership.
You
You know,
have to
we had
be, yeah, you
when
have
we
to be
took
satisfied with that role, with
right.
saying, I'm going to write the brief and I don't know where this is going to lead creatively because that's not my job. And sure, you're going to have some ideas of your own, but because there is a blurring, right, between strategy and creative, there can be a temptation to want to cross that line. And
Yeah.
I think that's a real caution to strategists, is to remember your role. Now, context is going to, if you're in a small agency, you might have more opportunity to contribute to the creative idea than if you're in a big agency.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
if the creatives are having trouble generating ideas and you're on a deadline, they might be more receptive to hearing your ideas. But there's definitely a danger there with crossing a line of, into the creative domain, which could potentially backfire on you as a strategist.
You know what this is sounding a little bit like? Our conversation just a couple of episodes ago with TJ Bennett, who offers training for creative leadership. And one of the things we talked about, if you are a copywriter, a senior copywriter, or a senior art director, hoping for the promotion to ACD or creative director, one of the things you have to be mindful of is that you're not responsible for doing the work anymore. You have to kind of let that go. Uh, Although you also have to be able to come in at the ninth inning and finish the work if it's not going anywhere. So there's a little bit of crossover there. So what's another one of these 10 traits of a strategist that caught your eye?
Um, I think the one I chose was business intrigues you. And he says here, if business doesn't excite you, then what are you doing? If you think capitalism is disgusting, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
For whatever it's worth, I'm not a hardcore capitalist, but also I think a lot of the things masquerading as capitalism and democracy aren't really those things right now, and just shadows of what they could be. So, taking the second part of that aside for a second, we've had this discussion before, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're in this advertising business. This marketing is part of business, and business is part of capitalism. And I'm not going to rehash all the arguments we've had, but I think a good strategist has to have a good grounding in business. It turns out that my educational background is a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, with a major in economics. So I never expected to go into the advertising business, but that business background I think has benefited me, in
Hmm.
terms of understanding the way businesses work, rather than just going straight into advertising without that context of, okay, you know profit margins and sales and revenue and core competencies. All of that kind of business background, I think, really helps a strategist. He says here, the flaw: thinking that you have to act and sound like a business strategist or consultant. For 15 years, I've heard agency leadership teams bemoan how the consultants are coming for our lunch and think advertising agencies need to act more like management consultants. This is such a misdirection and has led to these people not telling the world about the value this industry creates, but acting embarrassed about what the industry actually is. And I think
Wow.
that I
Yeah,
think that
those last few words are really important.
I think that's certainly true. And we have to remember that we're not business strategists, we're communications uh, and advertising strategists, and we help clients solve their communications problems. And we find what are the communication problems that can help us solve a business challenge. And so I think forgetting that the end product is a creative product could be a trap if you go too much down the business route. So it's a balancing act, really, between creativity and business.
Sorry, Henry, I agree with you. I think this flaw draws a bright light onto something that we've talked about before, and that is there are elements in our industry who are just not comfortable with the fact that we are in the entertainment business. We're in the show business, right? And we're trying to build fame for our clients, a concept that big folks like Steve Harrison and Bob Hoffman have been touting for a long time, and others are not comfortable with. So the flaw part of that, I think Mark brings out very well. And uh, you've often said that Bill Bernbach, who was a giant in the creative side of the world, was an astute businessman.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he wouldn't have been as successful as he was if he hadn't been. So
Yeah.
that's critical. That's really critical. Well said. Why don't you scroll down, because my second one is the next one. You're a student of the world. I mean, I've said many times on our program and in private conversations with you that I love to read. I'm reading constantly. I've got 4 or 5 books going at once, audiobooks. It's like I have something I read in the morning, I have something I listen to in the afternoon, I have something I read it before I go to bed. And I can keep it all straight in my head. You have to be curious. You have to want to be knowledgeable of what's going on, not just in advertising, but in every aspect. And we're bringing on Steve Harrison and Dave Dye in May to talk about their new book, The Howard Gossett Show. And that's one of the things that Howard Gossett was a huge proponent of. You have to really know what else is going on in the world. So the feature here is you're a lifelong student. You know it. That's why you enjoy the start of a new project. You get to learn more stuff. I've often said that advertising is one of the last remaining professions or areas that require you to be kind of a Renaissance person. You have to know a lot about a lot of things, maybe not in depth, but you have to be, what you don't know, you've got to be curious about, and you've got to be intrepid. Now, with a flaw, perhaps you get lost in how much there is to know and are nervous about your ideas because you don't feel you know enough. Boy, that describes me. I'm constantly wanting to know more. So as a creative looking at what a strategist needs or what a trait of a good strategist, I sympathize, I get that. But I'm also curious to see what you think. I know this one is my choice, but it's one of those things that I think I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I think you find this one intriguing and insightful.
Yeah. So in terms of being a lifelong student, I totally identify with that. It's funny. It says that's why you enjoy the start of a new project. You get to
Mm.
learn more stuff. I've worked on cruise lines. I've worked on drugstores. I've worked on fast food brands. I've worked on automotive brands. I've worked on banks. And each time you have a learning curve, and you have to learn, how does that industry work? How do consumers perceive that industry? How do they perceive the brand that you're working on? How do they perceive the competitors? And you're constantly um, learning and feeding your brain with new information. And I agree with the idea of Renaissance man, right? To use some
Mhm.
gendered language. But a Renaissance person, you have to be willing, to say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And I think that's another trait, right? Is like knowing where to go and what to consult when you don't know the answer to something.
Yeah.
Increasingly that is like AI or whatever, but we've had our talks about the dangers there, etc. Um, and the flaw, I think it's possible to maybe feel like you're overwhelmed, like that there's too much out there. But I think over time you hone the skill of like figuring out, like, let's say you're taking on a new assignment, figuring out what's really important versus what's just noise. Which I guess is another trait of a good strategist, is filtering the signal from the noise.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to drop a story that is relevant. And again, this is from a creative's perspective, not necessarily a strategist, but I was interviewing for a full-time gig at the Designery in Long Beach, California, and they specialized, I think they're still around, and they specialized in, among other things, on collateral, mostly for automotive products. I mean, beautiful 6 and 8 color brochures, which are probably redundant today with the world of the internet, but that's what they were looking for back in the day when I was looking for a job there. And they wanted me to work on the Mercedes account. And the creative director, who's not there anymore, I knew he had brought me in to do some freelance work and I was being considered for the position. And he said, really what I'm looking for for this position is, I think he called it a a lug nut, which is their nomenclature for someone who just breathed and slept and ate cars. Their whole world was cars. And I said, look, that's not me. And I'm not going to pretend to be a guy who loves cars. But what I am crazy about, what I am committed to is the whole creative process, which means I have to learn about your brand, your product from A to Z, inside and out, as if I were an engineer or a salesman or somebody who worked for that company. And I will commit myself to the process of giving you the best creative to sell your product. But if you're really looking for and I may have got the nomenclature wrong, but he just wanted a car guy. I ultimately didn't get the job because he wanted someone who knew cars inside and out. I thought personally that I thought was a flawed way of looking at it. That's what he wanted. I get it. But to me, it's like hiring a copywriter and art director who's only done hamburgers. I want a hamburger copywriter. That's so narrowly focused, that's myopic. That's why I like this. You're a student of the world because you have this eclectic approach. You're not myopic.
Yep.
Okay, I got off my soapbox, so you can.
No, I agree. I think, I mean, devil's advocate, maybe because it was collateral, and he felt like he needed somebody that could, just instantly, have the lingo, as opposed to brand advertising, which, you don't have to be as familiar or deep in the woods with all of the car features and those things. But no,
Well, I
I
don't want to sound like I'm selling myself for a job that's gone 20 years ago, but he gave me a full day to write, 500 words for a catalog page, and it was nothing, right? He gave me a full day I spent the morning reading and asking questions and the afternoon drafting copy. And he said I nailed it. I mean,
awesome.
I blew him away. I just didn't get the job.
His loss.
His loss, exactly. So I guess I am competitive, huh?
Absolutely.
I'm competitive. Well, that was a great list. And it kind of echoes to our first episode. Like you said, you picked out writing as a necessary trait, and I picked out listening not only with our ears, but with our eyes. So he covered both of those and we added to it.
Yep.
So Henry, good stuff.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Ibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time.
Bye bye.